Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Um, just want to make sure everyone can hear me. If someone could give me like a thumbs up. Awesome. All right, thanks, Brent. Been having trouble with my mic lately, so I'm glad everything's working. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I was a little confused because earlier I was logging in, looked like the other people were still in there from the other session. Welcome back, everyone. Happy New Year. My name is Alan Abrija. I'm a disability specialist here at the Key office. And today we're going to be going over how to make your online documents accessible. We only have 45 minutes, so it's going to be a little condensed session versus the ones that I normally do. So we started doing these workshops, I want to say over a year ago, in partnership with the Educational Media Center, with Leanne Risley, and actually Brent Hirata, Rachel Inake, myself, and Chris Hernandez. So we've just kind of continued it throughout the year. Last summer, I did a few sessions, and it's just a good idea, even if you've attended it before, just to kind of get a refresher. So the session objectives, basically, we're going to learn how to apply web accessibility for text and images to your document. We'll go over some free web accessibility checkers that allow you to check your document, and we'll talk about how you can make inaccessible documents accessible. It says there, create an accessible syllabus. So we were using that. We were doing that during the live workshops, the face-to-face workshops. We're probably not going to have time to do that today, but I'm hoping whatever kind of objectives we go through today, you'll be able to get enough at least to get you started. And there are several of us on campus that you can always contact if you want like a more kind of intimate one-on-one session, or if you want us to look at your documents. I'm definitely available if you want me to just kind of go over anything you've created for your course. Yeah. None of us are really, would say, experts on this, but we know a little bit of everything, and hopefully working together, we can assist all of you to meet your needs for your class and other documents that you're creating. Okay. I went over a lot universal design when I first started doing this session. I sent out a survey to get feedback, and a lot of the feedback I got was not to really spend too much time on this. So I'll just kind of go through the slides. But basically, the reason we mentioned universal design in the beginning when we were doing these sessions was we just want to kind of give you the idea of when you're creating your classes or any type of content, you want to make sure you're creating it for everyone, so that learning can occur for all students. You know, what we really want to do is minimize barriers and maximize learning. UDL is not the answer or end all be all for everything, but it's a good place to start. You know, if you kind of approach your class in a way that you want to make sure any document you're creating, any content you're creating is going to be accessible to everyone in the class, you're kind of a few steps ahead already. This doesn't mean you're not going to get any requests for any other type of accommodations, but it kind of just lessens, I want to say lessens the possibility of you having to do a lot more alterations to your content. So if you're not familiar with UDL, it's a proactive design approach to ensure that learning environment is usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without need for adaptation. And again, that's kind of a disclaimer there, because you're always going to run into someone who might need a little bit more help. But again, if you approach this in a way that you're trying to capture everyone in your class, all learners, then it does minimize the amount of modifications that you need to do moving forward. Okay, part of what kind of encouraged us or motivated us to do this presentation is that the the University of Hawaii, has entered into a voluntary resolution agreement with the Office of Civil Rights. So based on this agreement. It appears about a year or so ago, we were cited for not having accessible content on our websites. So we made an agreement with the Office of Civil Rights that we were going to start changing that, making changes to our content. So if you look at this slide here, there's two dates. One is fastly approaching and one has already passed. So any current or online content and functionality that's created by the University of Hawaii, sponsored by the University of Hawaii system, that includes all the community colleges, needs to be fully accessible online by May 3rd, 2021. And we do have groups of people throughout the organization working on this. Prior to Kathleen Cabral's retirement, she did a lot of work on our website to make sure that we meet this functionality. It also says new online content and functionality should be accessible by May 1st, 2019, and that date has already passed. So, and we continue to do this. That's why we continue to do the workshops. Is we often get new people every semester, or again, you may need a refresher. So we just want to make sure that we're holding to that agreement as best as we can. Just to give you an idea of what needs to be accessible. So anything that goes on the web, all websites, instructional materials, documents, and electronic media. Okay. And just so we don't feel bad, this is actually happening all over the United States, not just at the University of Hawaii. Here's an example of the Harvard University being cited or having a lawsuit brought against them for not having accessible documents or the video not being captioned. Okay, so let's get into the presentation or the workshop. So first we're gonna go over how to create web accessibility for your text. And the 6 guidelines to remember, or we're gonna go over, is we wanna make sure we're using headings and we're using lists. And when we're creating links like URLs or links to other websites, we wanna make sure that those links are meaningful. And we also wanna make sure that our fonts are easy to read. And we often use tables, a lot of us, when we create our syllabi or when we do our presentation. So you wanna create tables with a header row and a column, and you wanna make sure your color contrast is being done correctly between your text and your background. Okay, so let's start off with headings. Anytime you create a document, whether it's a syllabus or a presentation that you're presenting in a PowerPoint or to your course, to your students, you want to make sure you use headings to structure the content on the page. You want to make sure they're organized in the right order. If you're using a Google Docs, you can look through the headings under the if you look here under the normal text or under the tools, you'll be able to see title, subtitle, heading 1, 2, and 3. If you're using a word processor, usually like Microsoft Word, there's usually built-in tools in there also. And the reason we want to use title and headings in appropriate order is really for students who are using a screen reader. If you don't have the headings in the right order, if you have heading 2 first and then heading 1 on the bottom, when the screen reader reads it, it'll read it in that order. So, for someone who doesn't have use of their eyesight, it can be very confusing if everything's not done appropriately. Again, you do not want to skip heading levels. You want to use headings consistently throughout your document. So here's an example of using headings appropriately. Course number and title can usually be heading 1. If you have instructor information, that can be your heading 2, and then so forth. Yeah. You also want to make sure that you use a proper list. Using the built-in bullets or numbered lists is always it's always good. When you're using bullets, you want to order in the list. The order in the list doesn't matter when you're using bullets, but when you're using numbers, you do want to list in a sequence. We mentioned earlier about using meaningful text. So here you see 2 examples of links that will lead, or URLs that'll lead to maybe another website or another page. So if you look at example 1, it says, click here for a transcript of the lesson. And then example 2, it says the lesson 1 transcript provides a time-coded detailed description of the contents video discussed in the video. So looking at the next slide, example 1 is actually not a good example, not a good way to create links. Although if you ran this through a screen reader, it'll read it exactly like that. Click here for a transcript of the lesson, which really doesn't sound too bad. But if you make it more meaningful and just actually write down what it's going to lead, where it's going to lead you to, like, for example, to they name the URL lesson 1 transcript. So that's just more descriptive and, again, easier to follow for someone using a screen reader. So again, you want to avoid click here or more. And what you want to do is link to the destination and then keep the link text concise. And links should open in the same window. The reason for that is if you click on a link and it goes in and it opens in another window, usually when you're using a screen reader, it's only going to read the active window. So usually if you click on a link and it opens a new window, that new window is not active until you click on it. Again, someone who's able to see can easily navigate that, but someone who's using a screen reader, if they're not being made aware that there's a new window open, they're going to miss out on that information. I use Revel Pearson for one of the courses I teach, and when they click on it in Laulima, for some reason, it has to open up in a new window. So if you're in a situation like that where you can't avoid but open up a new window, if you can just put it in a description. So if a link must open a new window, it's best practice to indicate it. So you can put like a text that says it's going to open in a new window, and the screen reader will indicate that. And you can also use a symbol that says indicates it's going to open to a new window. Another thing we want to be mindful about is when you're using fonts. So font size is very important. You want to avoid using all caps because that usually indicates that you're yelling. So in general, 12 points font is good for the body of the text. 9-point fonts are good for footnotes or endnotes. So it says here standard 12 or 14 is okay for paragraphs. Color alone should not be used to emphasize important information. You want to use bold and italicize important text, and avoid underlining and using blue because that's usually reserved for hyperlinks. When you create tables, you want to create tables with a header row. Images, create tables as plain text, not as inserted images. Again, because you want to make sure that the screen reader is able to read it. You want to avoid using tables just for visual appeal. When we started doing this workshop, we had a lot of instructors come and bring hard copies of their syllabi or syllabus, and very creative, lots of pictures, and it's very nice to look at. And I know a lot of us have that creative sense in us, and we don't want to just create a plain syllabus. But when you're talking about accessibility, that's really what you have to do. Try to make everything as plain as possible so that the screen reader can read it. There is a way to, if you want to create two versions of your documents, an accessible version and one that's more maybe visually appealing to your other students in class, or you just have that creative side of you that wants to do that. You can create two versions and have a link that leads to the accessible version for those who need it. You want to make sure each column has a designated header, and you don't want to have merge cells or leave cells blank. If you're not familiar with what merge cells are, we'll have an example here in a few minutes. Okay, so here would be a poor example of a table, only because this is the area where it shows that the cells are merging. So when we say merge cells, really what we're saying is So if you look at here, column 1, 2, and 3, the cells and the rows are very uniformed. Then you look at the fourth column, it kind of goes into the 2 cells. So you don't want to be doing that. So again, the title is also not, shouldn't be part of the table, it should be outside. And it's also merged across multiple cells. And then here's an example of, again, the merged cells. Okay, so here's an example of the table once the corrections are made. So you notice the title is separate from the table itself, and you're looking at a more uniformly designed table, more evenly designed cell columns and widths. Yeah. So in Microsoft Word, you can use the table properties to specify header, row, and column. Google Docs does not specify the header row, but you can use Grackle to make corrections. And Grackle's a tool that's free to everyone within the University of Hawaii system. If you're an employee, whether you're APT, faculty, or staff, you have access to Grackle. You want to make sure you use sufficient color contrast between your text and background. And this is more to accommodate individuals who are colorblind. Again, you want to, or have low vision. So you want to avoid using red or green and red and black combinations when you're doing your color contrasting. So if you're looking at this examples here, the first 3 are not very, it's not something I would use, and that's just based on the contrast ratio. If you look at the first one, it's basically gray and then a darker version of gray, so that wouldn't work. The white kind of gets drowned by the green in the second one. I would think the third one would be good, but it says here that it's not. So if you look at the fourth example, this is really what you want to go after. Something has a contrast ratio of 17.6 to 1. And this is just an example of using colors and icons, you know, the dark luggage and then the different color symbols. If you want to do, if you're creating a document, you want to make sure your color contrast is up to par. You can use WebAIM as a color checker. Again, this is another free tool that's available for anyone to download or add on to your computer. So that covers web accessibility for text. Again, the 6 guidelines we went over was make sure you use headings, make sure you use lists, and your links are meaningful, and that your fonts are easy to read. And when you're creating tables with a header row, when you create tables, you want to create it with a header row and a column, and you want to use color contrast between text and background. Okay, next we're going to go over web accessibility for images. You want to use this, make sure you use descriptive alternative text for an image. You want to make sure it's a meaningful description of an image for those who are unable to see them. The best way to describe alternative text, or if you're you're looking at a picture and you're wondering how do I best describe this, one tip is to imagine you're talking to your student on the phone and you're trying to describe what you see on your screen, but they can't see it. So, you know, what would be the best way to do that? Why should you use alt text? So here we have an example of what a sighted view of the screen is. So if you're looking at this, you notice you see 4, adolescents. It says 9 new trailers you should watch this week. And then the second image is just a gentleman wearing a baseball cap with looks like headphones, wireless headphones there, wearing glasses. And then it says wireless convenience is driving us to spend more on headphones. So for someone who's sighted or able to use their eyes, that you can see this clearly and not have any trouble. If you were using a screen reader and you didn't have alternative text, this is basically what would be read back to the individual. So again, if you look at the bubble, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, even for us looking at it, right? So the 6 guidelines we're gonna go over or objectives. You wanna describe the content and function of the image. And you wanna keep in mind that context matters. So different descriptions for different images, it may differ depending what course you're teaching or what context you're trying to describe the image in. You wanna keep your descriptions concise, and you do wanna avoid using certain words. And you wanna make sure you end with a period, and again, skip the title text, and we'll explain why later on. If you have decorative images that don't really, they're just there to, for aesthetic reasons and don't really convey any information, you can use the null symbol, the 2 quotation marks, and then when you're using a screen reader, it'll just say this is a decorative image, or skip over it. So here we ask you to describe the content and function of the image. So an example of the first picture, looking at looks like a subway station there, or a train station. So a good description for that would be just crowd of people at a train station waiting to catch a train. And the next image is basically an image of a search box. So just putting search or search box would be fine in that case. Okay, here we ask you to provide a description of the image. Again, description of the image depends on its context. So if this were a photography course and you were trying to describe this image, you would just say close-up grayscale photograph of man outside, face in focus, and unfocused background. If you were using this image in a theater class, and you would say that this is a star or actor, Adam Lee, looking strained outside in the rain. So here we have an image of a stack of pancakes. We talked about being succinct. Typically when you want to describe things, no more than a few words are necessary, and a good guideline is about 125 characters. So what's recommended in this situation or this picture is if you just say stack of pancakes with powdered sugar and leave it at that, you should be fine. What we don't recommend is saying 11 pancakes on a plate with powdered sugar on the top pancake. This is also called hotcakes, which is usually eaten for breakfast in the morning. So that's a little bit too excessive. Yeah, you want to keep it short and concise. When you're describing images, you want to avoid saying image of or photo of or this links to, because what will happen is the screen reader is already going to read it that way. If it's an image, it's going to say image of, or photo of, or picture of. So you don't want to, if you're describing a picture, you don't want to put picture of in the beginning of that description, because it just gets confusing, again, when it's going through a screen reader. If it is important for your audience to know what type of image it is, for example, if it's a photograph, illustration, or animation, then you can include it at the end of the alt text. So here's an example of that. So here we have an animated picture of a tetrapod. So you can say tetrapod walking animation after the image, and then that'll make it a lot easier for the individual who's using the screen reader. Each alt text should end with a period. This will make the screen reader pause a bit after the last word in the alt text, which just creates a more pleasing reading experience. If your editor has a title field, you want to leave it blank. The title does not work on touch screens. It only works on desktops when you hover over the image. Adding a title text makes some screen readers read both the title text and the description, which is redundant. You can type the null image in the alt text field if you're using decorative images or images that do not convey any meaning. Again, here's a couple of examples, the background image or just a kind of decorative image divider. When you are adding alt text, here's a couple of examples. If you're using Laulima, you can go into image properties. Google sites, you can just click on the image, and usually you'll get a tool that comes up that allows you to add the alt text. Here's an example of a complex image where there's a lot going on. You know, you're being told to be succinct, keep things short and simple, but you have something like this and you feel like you want to describe everything. So good example is just a bar chart showing monthly and total visitors for the first quarter 2014 for sites 1 to 3. You can also have a link that leads to a separate page that contains a more detailed information or a longer description of the image. Yeah. So if you look at the bottom here, there is a link to the image description. So that covers web accessibility for images. Again, the 6 guidelines was to make sure you describe the content and function of the image. And again, context matters. You want to keep it concise and avoid certain words. You want to end with a period, skip the title text, and then use null for decorative images. If you're not sure whether you should be using alt text or not, there is an alt text decision tree available. If you go to this, I think this is WebAIM. But I'll have the slides available to any of the attendees today if you want copies of the slides, and that way you'll have access to all these free tools that are available to you. Okay, so practice makes good. Here we have some examples we can go through. So what would be an alternative text for this image? If you're familiar with who this is, you know, it's George Washington, our first president. You can say George Washington, and then the screen reader will just read it as that. And he'll also read everything that's underneath the picture. What would be an appropriate alternative text for this image? So you can also use the null value since it already has George Washington underneath the image and then a description of who he is. Again, the screen reader will just read through that already. We talked about context mattering. So here's an image of a gentleman explaining something to a female. If this was a business course, you describe it one way. If it was a marketing flyer, then you describe it another way. So if it was business school or business course, you could say business school professor pointing to his laptop as he explains to a female student. If this was a marketing flyer, you can say salesman points to his laptop screen as he explains the education software to a female client. So that's just an example how different images are described differently depending on the situation. Here we have all the different campuses within the University of Hawaii system. For myself, I can look at this and know that if it says Manoa, you know, I've been to the Manoa campus, so I know they're describing the UH Manoa. I've been to the Hilo campus, so I know that that's the University of Hawaii at Hilo. And same for the other campuses. But for someone who is using a screen reader, has never been to any of our campuses, or just not aware of what's being described, the context that's being described, it'll just read to them, this is Manoa, this is Hilo, this is West Oahu, and then they don't know if they're just being given a description of a certain geographical area. You know, so something like this, you want to make sure, again, you're concise and your descriptions match. So under Manoa, maybe putting University of Hawaii at Manoa, University of Hawaii at Hilo, University of Hawaii at West Oahu, and so forth. That'll make it easier, again, for someone who's not familiar with these campuses, or our campuses. Again, each image should specify the campus that it's linking to. And here it asks, what would be the most appropriate alternative text for the icon image? You can just say it's PDF file type. Here we have some examples of charts, and it just asks you to, which is a good chart and why. So going back to the color contrast earlier, if you look at the middle chart, you know, it's black and just other darker shades of gray, so that's not really gonna work. Here we have red, blue, and green, which looks like it would be good, but they did mention something about not using like blue and green or red and green in combination for individuals who are colorblind or have low vision. So in this situation, it would be the third chart that's actually good in terms of color contrast. So we've touched briefly on describing complex images. If you teach a subject such as math, sciences, or geography or art, and you want to learn how to do more about writing descriptions for your images, you can go to this website here. Again, I'll have the slides available to anyone who wants copies of it. We do have free accessibility web checkers for your websites, for your documents, and for color contrast checking. So there's Wave, which is an accessibility checker for your website. So basically you run your website through it, it'll tell you what the errors are, what needs to be corrected. There's also a checker, which does the same thing. You can run your URL through there and it'll tell you how accessible is your website. Word, if you're creating a Word document, they also have an accessibility checker when you go to the menu to save or print. If you go to check for issues, right over here, it'll drop down to the menu here where it says check for accessibility. And again, we have Grackle Docs, which is an add-on to the Google Suite. So you would just have to log in with your UH email and then search for the Grackle Docs app, and then you can download it. And each time you log in to any computer, as long as you're logged in with your UHID, you should have access to the Grackle Docs. Yeah. There's also Adobe Acrobat DC, which allows you to check your PDFs for accessibility. And this is also free, I believe. You just have to open up an account with your again, credentials. And again, WebAIM just does the color checking. Okay, so that pretty much covers our presentation for today. In the previous sessions, I had people I gave out documents and had individuals kind of do these practice exercises and return them to me, and I was able to check the accessibility to see if they did it correctly. We won't be doing that this time around, but if you have any questions about documents you've created, you can definitely send that my way, and I do my best to look it over and give you some suggestions on how to correct it. We have actually some significant time left, so if anyone has any questions or would want me to go over anything specifically, now's the time to do that.
Hi, Alan. It's Jane Bopp.
Hi, Jane.
Hi. So for the headings, it's okay when we have like the first heading title, first heading 1, it's okay to use like 2 repeatedly, right?
Yes. As long as they're labeled correctly in the headings, it should be fine.
So I can do heading 1, and then I can have several heading 2s.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Any more questions? So we did, I think we applied for a grant, Leanne Risley did, to get an accessibility specialist. So we do have someone coming on board for this year who's going to be able to help instructors, create, documents or materials for their course that are accessible. So we'll have myself, the EMC, that new individual that's came on board to assist you guys. So hopefully, again, not every one of us is an expert in all of this. We're all still just learning. But again, just feel free to approach us. And I do notice, a lot more people have gone through our trainings and are creating more accessible documents. So that's good. One of the feedback I've received in my surveys when I did this over the summer was, what are the consequences if we don't follow the voluntary resolution agreement? Like, and almost a way that is there a way to kind of get around that? And there's really not. We entered that agreement with OCR. So we need to continue to follow that as best as we can. Even if we're not at 100% yet, if we're showing that we're making efforts every day in everything we create, we that it looks good on our part. In terms of consequences, as far as I know, if you enter into a voluntary resolution agreement with OCR, you say, this is what I'm going to do because of this complaint that was brought upon us. If you violate that, I'm assuming there's fines for the university, and then further lawsuits down the road, right? Students who are needing this accessibility and don't have it, if they were to bring up a lawsuit and then the Office of Civil Rights comes back and says, you guys said you were going to do this. Why are we still getting these complaints? Then that just wouldn't look good for our institution, for the university as a whole. So in terms of the answer to that, what are the consequences if you don't follow the create accessible documents? That's basically more litigation, I would expect, and could be some financial fines to the university and to our, depending which campus is again creating the violation. Let's see here. Yeah, I agree, Jane. Why would we get around? Yeah, I don't think anyone would. I think there are some people there. It's like, they kind of ask those questions maybe as just a precursor to, in case their documents are not fully accessible. We still get some, like, again, not everyone is trained in this area. So when you're, sometimes it feels like you have to redo your course. You create this wonderful online distance learning course. You got all these materials that you're, as an instructor, you're very proud of, and you feel like you've utilized a lot of your creative skills, and then to be told that it's not accessible and you got to redo it again. I think that's where we get some maybe some resistance or just apprehension to having to do that. So those questions come up, like, what happens if we don't make it accessible? But I agree, we should be working towards this every day.
And it's not just for students who, who can't see or who can't hear, because I notice when I put transcripts up on my online classes, like if I can find transcripts for any of the short videos, and they have captioning too, just people are different learners. Some people hate watching the videos, but they love reading the transcripts. Or
Yes.
or when they're writing their papers and they have to give evidence that they've watched the materials or they're citing something, that you can go back to the transcript and like take actual quotes or cite, where. So it just helps all learners, not just people with disabilities, right?
Exactly. And that's why, when the presentation was created, in the beginning, we talked about UDL because the UDL kind of encompasses everyone, whether you have a disability or not. You just have different ways of learning, different ways of accessing and processing materials. So yeah, good point.
Ellen, it's Bryson. I had a
Yes.
question. So I've seen like accessible calendars where it's literally, it looks like a Word document where the lines, like the days are written out line by line, like January 11th, next line, January 12th. I can see how like if you're used to like a traditional calendar, that you can kind of get lost in it. Is there anything against like having both an accessible and a more, I guess, traditional version of the documents?
No. In fact, yeah. So we did go over that in the presentation. So if, like I said, there's a lot of us are, very pride ourselves with our creativity and the way we create certain documents. So you can certainly create things the way you would normally create it for yourself or how you've been doing it all this time. And then if you want to create a more accessible version, you can do that. And all you would have to do is within that document, have a link somewhere, somehow that leads to the accessible version. So you can definitely have two different versions
Okay.
for different individuals to access.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Sure. And thank you for the question.